Good morning, friends, and welcome to another week. Today is Monday, Valentine's Day, February 14th. Don't forget that. My wife and I, oh, by the way, I'm PB. This is another episode of PB Reads the Bible. My wife Sue and I really don't celebrate Valentine's Day. I try, I think I do. Tell her and show her how much I love her every day. We don't wait for one special day. That being said, we still maybe do some special things. Went out to lunch the other day. But we don't. I think it was last year Sue started. We were walking through the Walmart and Sue pulled a Valentine's card out of the rack and handed it to me. He said, "Here, happy Valentine's Day." I read it and she put it back in and we walked away. So now that's kind of our thing. We do that. We did that this year as well. Of course, we could have done that, I think, January 1st or 2nd because the Valentine's cards are out so early. Anyway, I digress. Terribly unusual that may be. But this is another episode of PB Reads the Bible. It's episode 5 on our journey through the book of Judges. And thank you for joining me this morning. It's wonderful to be here with you, with each other. Wonderful to be here with each other. Go ahead and check in. I see a couple people already doing that. Good morning, Marcia, and good morning, Cheryl. Oh boy. A little dry or something this morning. You'll have that. My CPAP machine was making noise last night, so I shut it off and didn't sleep with it. And I think that helped. That dries me out as well. Good morning, John and Cindy. Good morning. Good to have you folks with us this morning as well. So just a couple quick announcements or things like that. And getting back to checking in, go ahead and check in, especially if you're new. It doesn't matter if you're watching live or if you're watching some other time. Go ahead and check in. I go back in here to look for that. Also use the comment section for comments and for questions, where you can send me a text, 570-351-1619. So we will be doing, I believe we will be doing chapters 5, 6, 7, and 8 this week, Monday through Thursday. Wednesday and Thursday will be recordings. I think I'm going to do them tomorrow to make sure that they're done and loaded properly and ready to go. Taking Wednesday as my day off because, well, Saturday I have a conference obligation that's going to have me out of town all day. Plus, Wednesday I have an appointment to get our taxes done. Yay! And Thursday I have a fairly early morning Zoom meeting. I think it starts at 9:30, but I don't want to risk not being able to finish this up properly, give this the adequate time before getting to that meeting. So Wednesday and Thursday will be recordings. You can still leave comments or ask questions. I'll check later in the day on Thursday and respond to any of those, or next week, whatever. Good morning, Marilyn, and good morning, Pat. Good to have everybody. Getting a good crowd out there. Wonderful. Folks have been, and some of you folks have been with me right from the beginning, from December 1st of 2020. Been over a year that we've been doing this. Yeah, we took a couple of weeks off here and there, but still had been doing this at least 10, 11 months, even with those weeks off, and Saturdays and Sundays, etc. Whatever. And this is the 11th book of the Bible that we're going through. And some of you folks have been with me right from the beginning. Others have been joining as we go along, which is wonderful. I love both of those, and I'm humbled to think that you're interested enough to come back. This is of value to you, so thank you for that. All right, so when last we left, Thursday, we had looked at chapter 4, which was the story. We're not even sure who the real judge is in that story because it's all kind of ambiguity in the language, and the author probably meant it to be that way. Good morning, Tammy. Good to have you with us as well. Um, and so we're left with three people, each of whom have a valid argument for them to be the judge, the main character of the story. But it can also be argued that all three of them combined make up the personage of the judge. It's a wonderful aspect of it. But it's Deborah, Barak, and Jael. Deborah was literally a judge, a prophetess, a prophet. Barak was the military leader who got the army to go into Canaan and to chase after Sisera and his men. And Jael was the woman, the non-Israelite, who ultimately killed Sisera. So the book is now set up and goes into the chapter 5, which is a poem. It is the song of, it's normally referred to as the Song of Deborah and Barak. Jael plays an important part in the chapter and in the poem as well, but it's usually referred to as the Song of Deborah and Barak. There's so much going on in this. First of all, it is Hebrew poetry. And as we talked about, if you were with me when we went through Jonah, we spoke a little bit about Hebrew poetry and how it works, and the idea of parallelism, that line one and line two support each other quite often, or sometimes it can get very complicated with inner and interior and exterior parallelism, and sometimes it's actually lines 1 and 4 because 2 and 3 are inserted in a separate thing. So we're just going to go with the simple one, that oftentimes there's a couple lines meant to support each other in some way, sometimes by being very close to the exact same thing, and other times by being pretty close to the exact opposite. When it's the opposite, it's usually got that word but or something like that thrown in there. So chapter 5 is more Hebrew poetry and parallelism. Most biblical scholars agree, which is kind of amazing that they can agree on almost anything. But most biblical scholars agree that chapter 5 of Judges is one of the oldest written pieces of the Bible. There's the chapter in Exodus, I think it's chapter 15, but it's the Song of Miriam. Song of Miriam, the Song of Moses, they're right there together, are usually considered to be the oldest written down pieces of scripture, and that they're the oldest story. This comes in very close to it. It's considered to be so old. Now, how do they know that? They're much smarter than I am, first of all, but has a lot to do with the Hebrew language, the Hebrew that's used in the passage in this. Some of the wording and the syntax is just so old and so rare that it kind of has to be that old. It's so different than some of the other passages. Of course, as a result, kind of like I was saying yesterday in the sermon, talking about trying to translate Greek, we can have the same problem with translating Hebrew, because some of the words and the syntax it's just so old, so archaic, that we're not 100% sure what it means. And I'm going to be reading from the NRSV, and if you're reading along in the NIV, you might notice some spots that are different. Well, normally you will see spots that are different, but today you might see some spots that are very different. That's why, because the NIV went kind of one direction with how they translated it, and the NRSV went a slightly different way with how they translated it. And I think that in some cases the NIV was correct, got a better context of it, but other times it would seem that the NRSV got a better grasp of what was being said. And I'll try to mention at least one of those as we go along, because there's one that's fairly substantial as we do it. Now this poem is loaded with opposites, fairly powerful seeming opposites too. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that. All right. Then Deborah and Barak, son of Abinoam, sang on that day, saying, when locks are long in Israel, when the people offer themselves willingly, bless Yahweh. Pause. We're going to pause right off the bat. Only 2 verses in, BB. That's right. That phrase, on that day. Now, all we can assume, since this is older than the rest of Judges, and since it's older than chapter 4, but we can assume that they're referring to on that day, the day that that battle ended, the day that Sisera was killed, along with all of his charioteers and military, all his army. So it's on that day they're singing this psalm, this poem. And now, when locks are long in Israel, it's talking about hair, but you'll notice again the NIV translates it differently. When the princes in Israel take the lead. So what do either of those mean? I don't know, and I certainly don't know which one the author was trying to say. Which they were trying to say. Excuse me. It does seem to be speaking about youth and about these young princes, that they would be, or becoming youth, that they would lead Israel, lead Israel. Bless Yahweh. Continuing. Hear, O kings, give ear, O princes. To Yahweh I will sing. I will make melody to Yahweh, the God of Israel. Pause. You heard that parallelism there, right? I will sing to Yahweh, and then right after that, I will make melody to Yahweh, the God of Israel. I'm not going to stop each time to point out the parallelism. Don't worry. We'll be here all day and beyond. Yahweh, when you went out from Seir, when you marched from the region of Edom, the earth trembled and the heavens poured. The clouds indeed poured water. The mountains quaked before Yahweh, the one of Sinai, before Yahweh, the God of Israel. In the days of Shamgar, son of Anath, in the days of Jael, caravans ceased and travelers kept to the byways. The peasantry prospered in Israel. They grew fat on plunder because you arose, Deborah, arose as a mother in Israel. Pause. I'm going to pause because verse 7a, the first half of 7, NIV goes a completely different way, but NIV is probably a more accurate description of the context, because it's the author seems to be describing this poem, this song seems to be describing when things were bad, okay? When it wasn't safe to be out on the roads. The caravans didn't go, okay? The caravans didn't go on the roads for all this trade. So if that's taking place, how could the peasantry be prospering, right? No. Verse 7a in the NIV and beyond 7a, village life in Israel ceased. So things were horrible for the peasantry. Ceased until I, Deborah, arose a mother in Israel. So you see you can see the contrast, the difference between those two translations, those two understandings. And I do think the NIV, I'm not the only one, thinks the NIV gets a little bit better grasp, perhaps anyway, of the original context. That things were horrible and bad, and until Deborah arose. Oh, good morning from the park there, dear. And she says, as a mother of Israel. Now, it is thought that that's more than just a descriptor. That more than just the fact that she was a woman and kind of leading Israel, but it might be a more official title as a prophet, since she was a female prophet of God. So this idea of mother of Israel might be a more official title for her. So perhaps it should be capitalized rather than left in the lowercase letters. Continuing. When new gods were chosen, then war was in the gates. Was shield or spear to be seen among 40,000 in Israel? My heart goes out to the commanders of Israel who offered themselves willingly among the people. Bless Yahweh. Pause. So now we're going to look at 6 through 9 together because there's dramatic contrast in here. There's an army in Israel, apparently 40,000 warriors, but no swords or spears. So it's a poetic way of describing how weak Israel is, how militarily weak in particular Israel is, that they've got a whole bunch of people, but they've got no weapons. They have no weaponry. It's also speaking about these new gods who are also powerless. Now, how does this passage, I'm sorry, not this passage, actually going back to verse 4, because 4 through 5 speak about how powerful God is. That when God went out from Seir and marched from the region of Eden, the earth trembled and the heavens poured. So it's describing, torrential downpours, rainfalls. And if you've followed along with any of my other ones, you'll know what I'm going to say next. The idea of water and rain is symbolic of chaos. Symbolic of chaos. But it also describes the God fighting this battle for Israel because of this power versus the weakness and powerlessness of Israel. Continuing, tell of it, you who ride on white donkeys, you who sit on rich carpets, and you who walk by the way, to the sound of musicians at the watering places. There they repeat the triumphs of Yahweh, the triumphs of his peasantry in Israel. Then down to the gates march the people of Yahweh. Awake, awake, Deborah, awake, awake, utter a song. Arise, Barak, lead away your captives, O son of Abinoam. Then down marched the remnant of the noble. The people of Yahweh marched down for him against the mighty. Pause. So here we're getting into the description of the battle that is described in chapter 4. It's kind of only using broad brushstrokes in here, although this is older. So the author is obviously assuming that the reader knows the story, even though that part of the story hasn't been quote unquote written yet, not into this book. But it's got Deborah, and Deborah sing a song. In other words, prophesy and call out to Barak, call out to the leaders. You tell us what God is saying. And Barak, lead your captives. It's kind of weird, captives, but he's speaking about his warriors, the ones who will come along with you, come along with you. Then march down march the remnant of the noble. The people of Yahweh march down for him against the mighty. Now we're going to start seeing again, we're going to see some contrasts taking place. What kind of contrasts? Between those who respond to the call, between those tribes of Israel who do respond to the call, and those tribes of Israel who kind of stay home. From Ephraim, they set out into the valley, following you. Benjamin with your kin. From Machir, marched down the commanders, and from Zebulun, those who bear the marshal's staff. The chiefs of Issachar came with Deborah, and Issachar faithful to Barak, and into the valley they rushed out at his heels. Pause. So it describes all the tribes that are coming with them. Ephraim, Benjamin, Machir, which is the half tribe of Manasseh, Zebulun, and Issachar. Okay, they're all marching out with Deborah, with Barak, following Barak down through into the valley, down to the battle. Among the clans of Reuben, there were great searchings of heart. Why did you tarry among the sheepfolds to hear the piping for the flocks? Among the clans of Reuben, there were great searchings of heart. It's a way of saying that they stayed home. that's a way of saying that they stayed home. They were concerned about their own stuff. They were concerned about their sheep, um, and or at least using that as an excuse to not go out to war. They wanted to protect and stay home. Gilead stayed beyond the Jordan. Gilead was one of the tribes that had taken their inheritance east of the Jordan. East of the Jordan, must be east of the Jordan. And they didn't want to bother crossing the river to come to the aid of the rest of Israel. And Dan, why did he abide with the ships? Dan's land is right alongside, is towards the sea, towards the Mediterranean, and would prefer the relative safety of their ships and that section of land and the water than get involved in the battle. Asher sat still at the coast of the sea, very similar to Dan, settling down by his landings. Zebulun is a people that scorned death. Naphtali, too, on the heights of the field. Okay, so we've got this contrast between the tribes that did respond and did follow Barak and those that stayed home and didn't participate, didn't come to the aid of all of Israel. Continuing, the kings came, they fought. Then fought the kings of Canaan at Tanakh by the waters of Megiddo. They got no spoils of silver. Okay, so now remember, the description of Israel's army is that there's no sword or no spear. So how are they going to win this battle? God's power. And now we see what. Now, and remember, they're by the waters of Megiddo. Probably they thought it was a safe place to be. The stars fought from heaven. From their courses, they fought against Sisera. The torrent, Kishon, swept them away. The onrushing torrent, the torrent Kishon, march on, my soul, with might. So nature is fighting with God, because of God. God is using nature to fight these people of Canaan, the enemies of Israel, when Israel is powerless to fight on their own. So it's got the symbols mentioned earlier about the skies pouring forth. So here we've got the rush, this torrent of the Kishon River is wiping them away. You're talking mud. Remember, they're all in chariots. They've got this, the super army, which can't do anything. Then loud beat the horse's hoofs with the galloping of his steeds. Curse Meroz, says the angel of Yahweh. Curse bitterly its inhabitants, because they did not come to the help of Yahweh, against the mighty. In other words, another place that didn't come to participate in the battle. And the idea of the horse's hoofs is the horses running away from the battle, because they broke loose from the chariots, which got stuck in mud, etc., etc., etc. Now the story turns to Jael. And I mentioned the other day that there's a strong argument that in that passage in the story in chapter 4, it's a reverse rape. It's because of the imagery of what is taking place. And I said it also takes place in this song, in this poem. And so we're going to be talking about that. Hope I don't make anybody uncomfortable, but hey, this is what's there. This is what's there. We don't see it because we don't understand it. I've been told by people, oh, reading the Bible is so boring. There's such boring stories. My answer is, you're not reading the right parts. Or you're just not understanding what you're reading, because the Bible is like daytime soap opera sometimes. And it's pretty out there with some of the stuff that it describes. Okay. Most blessed of women be Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, of tent-dwelling women most blessed. He asked water, and she gave him milk. She brought him curds in a lordly bowl. Pause, remember that from the story, and It's the idea of he asked for milk, or he asked for water, just something to refresh him. She gave him milk, which is heavier and more sedatively, especially since he's already tired, presumably. Here it says it's even curds, so it's even heavier and more sedativeness built into it. It does not describe him as falling asleep, and it does not describe him as being on the ground and under a blanket, as the narrative portion does. The imagery here seems to indicate he is standing or perhaps seated. Perhaps seated. It does not specify him as lying down. In fact, it says it seems more like seated or standing because of a couple of next lines. She put her right hand to the tent peg. She put her hand to the tent peg. She can't use her right hand for both. She put her hand to the tent peg and her right hand to the workman's mallet. She struck Sisera a blow and crushed his head. She shattered and pierced his temple. He sank, he fell, he lay still at her feet. At her feet he sank, he fell. Where he sank, there he fell dead. Pause. So you see, here it's got him falling. You can't fall from a lying down from a prone position or a dorsal position. You can fall from a seated or standing position. So this describes him as being either seated or standing. And now we're getting into that reverse rape situation because of speaks about the penetration. So that's partially where we get it. But in here, in verse 27, it says he sank, he fell, he lay still at her feet. Literally in Hebrew, it means he fell between her feet or he fell between her legs, which in other places in Bible and in other Hebrew documents, is used as a sexual euphemism, being between the legs. So it's reversing that idea of rape, where the Canaanites would have thought, the conquerors, those in charge, would think nothing of raping and killing. Here, it's being reversed, and the woman, the powerless woman, seemingly by society standards, is the one raping and killing Sisera. Raping and killing Sisera. And there's more to it. Now the scene changes. We don't know that right off the bat. It takes a few words in there and then we catch up. But the scene changes and it moves from this tent on the plains, where the battle has taken place, back to Sisera's home, actually to his mother's home, or his home, and his mother lives with him. Right? Out of the window she peered. The mother of Sisera gazed through the lattice. Why is his chariot so long in coming? Why tarry the hoofbeats of his chariots? Pause. So we've got this very poignant scene of Sisera's mother awaiting his return, watching for his return, and wondering why it's taking so long for him to win this battle. Her wisest ladies make answer. Indeed, she answers the question herself. Are they not finding and dividing the spoil? A girl or two for every man. Spoil. Pause. I'm going to pause because in Hebrew, literally, it's a womb of one or two for every man. They're themselves, Sisera's mother is actually anticipating, thinking that his son is raping women, and they're okay with that. So we see these reversals taking place. And she seems not to be so concerned about her son as with all the stuff she's going to get when he comes back. a girl or two for every man. Spoil of dyed stuffs for Sisera. Spoil of dyed stuffs embroidered, 2 pieces of dyed work embroidered for my neck as spoil. Change the scene. So perish all your enemies, O Yahweh. But may your friends be like the sun as it rises in its might. And the land had rest 40 years. Pause. End of chapter 5. We don't see a new judge in today's chapter, but it's in a way it's revisiting chapter 4 and that whole thing. But I think that's it's interesting. Hebrew poetry, right? Anyway, so friends, I pray that this has been a beneficial use of your time. I pray that God has spoken to you in something that you've read, something we've said today. I pray that as you go about your days, each and every day, not just today, keep those eyes and ears, physical and spiritual, open to what our living, loving, active God is doing in your life and in the lives of those around you. When you see it, when you hear it, say, thank you, Papa. And then tell somebody, because we all need to hear that stuff. We need to hear that stuff. Witness to what's going on. Until we meet again, my friends, be blessed. Be blessed.